Welcome, LA Progressive readers. We're back again. This is Dick and Sharon with the LA Progressive. And today we're joined by Frank Joyce and Elizabeth Woodson. Frank is a lifelong Detroit-based activist and writer. He's a member of the National Council of Elders and active on the planning committee of King and Breakfast Breaking Silence Project. Elizabeth is executive director of Reckon With. She is an experienced theater of the oppressed facilitator, community organizer, and researcher. Welcome, both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you for being here. So Elizabeth and Frank jointly wrote a piece that we're carrying. We published it in the LA Progressive. It's entitled Responding to the Chaos. Let's Not Teeter or Totter. And why don't you tell us what led to the writing of this piece? Either one of you, jump in.
Elizabeth, you go first.
Well, Frank and I feel very lucky. I get to speak frequently with Frank. And I say lucky because I'm 32 and Frank is not. And we are both, as we share in the piece, we're both, we do share the experience of being racialized as white. And in that movement, there are not a lot of white people who make it their life's work to stay home and organize their neighbors, their family, their community. And before I met Frank, I was looking for an elder, for someone that I could turn to who shared my experience of racialization and had listened in the 60s when there were so many calls, especially from Black leaders, from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and many others, for white people to do the work that is ours, which is at home with ourselves, with our white family, friends, neighbors, and colleagues. And so finding Frank, I got to hear him at a conference, and we've been talking really frequently ever since. And so we are constantly writing and discussing and thinking about the moment that we're in the broader context of the movement that we're in. And the theme that emerged time and again was seeing how frenetic and overwhelmed and really off center so many white people are, especially in this moment, and the kind of cyclical pattern that we see in our political cycle, but also in our broader societal experience, where we have a crisis that we do not confront, and shockingly, it does not go away. And we really hope to highlight the opportunity in that and the hope in that, which is there is another choice. It's a choice that's actually very easy to make because it's you just responding to where you already are. And we wanted to share some of our conversations and our kind of collective thinking on that in this moment.
Wow, that's so amazing, Elizabeth. Frank, I'm going to let you jump in here, but I have to say, Elizabeth, you said that you're 32 years old. I think you must be a very old soul, because generally it takes a person quite a few more decades to realize that they're seeing a cycle repeated over and over and over again. Yes. Okay, Frank, go ahead.
Well, I'll pick up on that, Sharon. Thank you, because there's organized resistance to connecting the dots. There's organizing resistance to acknowledging what Elizabeth and I have come, one of our shared phrases is regression to the mean, or the relapse, or this notion that every time there is some sort of mitigation to the racial hierarchy or the gender hierarchy as well, there's an enormous backlash. And the backlash often pushes, and we're seeing this now in this moment so clearly. And I was just going to add this to what Elizabeth said. We've been talking for quite a while. We met at an ASALH conference almost 2 years ago now, and have been in conversation ever since. I really feel generationally we found each other in a way.
You have to tell our audience, what does ASALH stand for, or what is it?
The Association for the Study of African American Life and History.
Oh.
And I'll just mention this as a teaser. It was founded by someone whose name is Carter Woodson, and Elizabeth's name is Woodson. And yes, there is a connection there. So we'll come back to that or not. But as the case, this specific article really started with a discussion of the electoral activity last summer and the emergence of people who called themselves white dudes for Kamala Harris and the white women who were mobilizing to support Kamala's campaign. And we were intrigued by that because of the nature of work that we've both been doing it for years, more years for me than Elizabeth, but that's a function of, the calendar and the clock, I guess. Um, and we thought it was significant that they're in the electoral arena, which has its own limitations, and we speak to that in the piece. But we did think it was significant that it's always significant when any white person is willing to acknowledge their whiteness, because there's enormous denial of the impact and the history. It's a racialized society. It's been a racialized society from the very beginning. And running away from that is a component of that racialization. So we were intrigued by that. And that kind of set us on the course that led to this particular article in this particular moment.
So picking up on what both of you said, I mean, the core of the article is that white people shouldn't go into black communities and lecture and educate people there, but should stay home and go into white communities and organize and agitate and talk there. Now, your bios both have more organizations than I rattled off. I wondered if you could talk about a couple specific projects that you've pursued along that vein.
Mhm. Well, I'll go first on this one. Um, I spend a lot of my time in my own local community, which happens to be rather racially infamous to some at any rate. That would be Grosse Pointe, Michigan, which sometimes thinks of itself as the world headquarters of white Anglo-Saxon Protestantism, and has a legendary history, particularly of racial discrimination in housing and all that flows from that. And I've worked for several years now with a group we call ourselves Change is the Point, and we spell point with an E. How clever is that? But we are up to our eyeballs in the local issues of the school system. We were very involved. Last year was a school board election, and we were involved in that and had been previously. And in the whole plethora of racialized issues in Grosse Pointe, which geographically immediately abuts Detroit, Michigan, and to its north, another community called Harper Woods, Michigan, which in recent years has become predominantly black. So we are at the intersection, in the literal sense of the word, of city suburb conflicts and of how historically all white suburbs are trying and mostly failing to adjust to a changing racial dynamic. But what a microscopic metaphor for the inability of the United States writ large to adjust to the reality that we are a multiracial, multi-ethnic society. Uh, I'll stop right there. But that's a part of the local work. I'll just add one detail because I think it helps us to be able to think in chunks of things that we can do. And again, we love this radiate out concept. Um, One of the things we've done for, I don't know, going on 4 years now, it's a kind of miracle that we're able to do this, but we have a local shopper newspaper for which we every single month publish a racial justice themed full page ad that goes to 19,000 homes and businesses in our community. Um, Print is dying, but we're hanging on. uh, And so that's just an example of something that it's kind of a spine to our work. It's a project we have to figure out every month. What do we want to talk about? How do we say it in 200 words or less? How do we deal with the blowback we get when we publish these ads and so on? But if nothing else, I hope we're helpful to viewers today that there's no excuse for doing nothing, because there are so many things that are on a menu that you can do.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Elizabeth, same
Yes, no,
question.
yes, no, thank you so much. And I think that's where so much hope lies, right? One real impediment to change, especially at this time, is a feeling of overwhelm and powerlessness that many are expressing as we continue to see the degradation and collapse of our federal systems and avenues to change through policy, through the Supreme Court. It's creating a real sense of there's nothing that can be done. And what's so inspiring to me about the legacy of Frank and many others is how false that is, right? Which is the kind of truth of all community organizing, which is that we get to choose what we do every day. We have full agency over that. That includes how we choose to interact with our white family members, right? I, for many years, yelled at my parents. I was deeply disdainful of them. I was mean to them. And it got to the point, I'll always remember, where my mother, in a conversation where I was yelling at her, she said to me, she stopped and said, "I hate talking about race because you're always so angry at me." And it really brought me to my knees, because it finally forced me to see that under the guise of my supposed social justice warriorism, I was doing the exact opposite of the mandate from the movement. I was pushing away the people who my parents, no, they're not going to, I don't know who else they'll listen to. They might listen to me, right? Because they love me and they want me in their life. And I was doing everything I could to alienate them from not just from me, but from the movement, from truth, from justice. So I had to choose to change. I had to choose to connect with them, to love them, to ask questions, to listen, to believe that we all, right, could develop together into a future just, evolved, mature, grounded state that we were not in. And now, I run this organization called Reckon With. They've actually recently signed up to be participants. Recently with the Altadena, with the fires in LA, we were talking about that as a family. And my mother, I was so amazed and proud of her response, which was, we were saying how horrible it was. And she said, "I just think we should all remember that when Black families' homes have been destroyed, for the most part in American history, the cause has not been natural disaster. It has been white people and acts of terror." And it's these moments of just these small choices to turn towards so that we might all grow together, right? And then I think the other component is, right, our neighborhoods are really ground zero, right? These are the front lines that we are at. And when we abdicate, so much is lost. But when we turn towards it, it is challenging, right? So I have my own neighborhood experience as well. And I think it really speaks to the quote that we pulled from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee 1966 Vine City Project paper, which says, "How can you clean up someone else's yard when your own yard is untidy?" And again, it really hits me in my heart, because I did that for so many years. I went to volunteer, and there's a role for everything, right? Like, we need many things, but I went to go help and save, the Black children in the inner city school, and to, all that. And when I live in Montgomery, Alabama, and I was volunteering with an incredible organization, and I still am part of it, and I have so much awe for them. It's called Roll Into the Polls. They do incredible voter registration work in North and West Montgomery, which are the Black communities in Montgomery. And I felt so much meaning and community in those spaces. And yet, going through this analysis, right, we really have to look at, where do you live and who do you know and where do you need to be involved? Maybe you're not yet, but where do you need to be involved? Is there a homeowners association where you live? Is there a neighborhood association, right? And so going through that process, I had to answer that question. And the answer was yes. But was I a part of it? No. I was leaving my community, right? So instead, and I joined it, and it turned out it was where a lot of harm was being organized. There was a huge focus on bringing police into our neighborhood, to arrest neighbors who were not white. And that was clearly where I needed to be spending my time. And, it's an ongoing process. It will continue to take time, but folks wanted a different alternative to what was there. But the police was the only thing that seemed to be an option. But when we come together, you actually ask people what they need and want, what is failing for them. What they want is connection, right? So we started to have more community dinners. We started to canvass, go around the neighborhood, just ask people what they needed, and to start to build an alternative. So a community mediation process, because neighbors have spats sometimes. You need something, but it didn't have to be the police. And so these are these really tangible examples. And I think what's so inspiring is like we have potentially millions of these, right? If we all can be supported and encouraged to turn towards that and to really take it in as our work to do. And it's very encouraging to the spirit. It feels right to do what is yours in the soul. So.
Wow. So I'd be interested to learn, Elizabeth, and also Frank, what was the impetus for you to engage in the way that you have engaged? But before I ask you that, I just want to say that the LA Progressive, one of our, this isn't on our byline, but it is somewhere on the site. It says that we believe in the centrality of race. And what I believe in my heart of hearts is that the destruction of solidarity among like-minded people who should have a common cause, laborers and middle-class people, and the people that would naturally come together that are not coming together because of the racial divide. It only serves to weaken what could be a very powerful progressive movement. And I think that has been our Achilles heel since the beginning of this country, even before this country was founded. Initially, the 3/5 compromise in the Constitution, it wasn't there. It wasn't there. But that was sort of the beginning of the officialdom of breaking down the people, the laborers, by race, and by establishing race or constructing race as a way to establish a racial hierarchy and a way to determine who gets what. So it's sort of a proxy for determining merit, shall we say, a term that's been used a lot lately. So it's always refreshing to me when I hear white people coming from the place where you're coming from, because what all of us are looking for is to have a true working democracy. And I don't think we'll ever have that as long as we're so divided. So I'll start with you, Frank. You started in the 60s. Was there one thing that kind of triggered your desire to make a change and then to become an anti-racist?
Thank you for asking that. This is not necessarily common, but I actually have a pretty clean origin story. And I even have a short version of it. But before I tell that short version, Sharon, I want to applaud and connect with what you say and add simply this, that the difficulty that we see and that we tried to capture some of this in the piece is there is a quality of denial and an attempt to escape the power of racism in the United States and to think that we can fix it by fixing something else. And we speak to this very directly. We cannot fix racism by trying to adjust the price of eggs.
Yes.
We can fix racism by trying to acknowledge and address racism. And this clean story is this. 8 Mile Road, as some people may know, is an infamous dividing line, racial dividing line between Detroit and its northern suburbs. I should not exist by like the bumblebee can't fly. I grew up in all white communities. I went to all white schools. But one day in 1961, I was driving down the infamous 8 Mile Road and I saw a picket line of some activity. And I was, always a news junkie and always aware. I turned around. I saw that the picket line was protesting a segregated swimming pool at the corner of 8 Mile Road and Greenfield, technically in Oak Park, Michigan. And I said, I agree with those people. I parked my car. I got out. I joined the picket line. I didn't know anybody there. I came to know all of the people who were there. And short version, I got kicked out of the house. Uh, so, and I was 19 years old. But I had a factory job at the time, and I was able to be economically self-sufficient. But from that radiate out experience changed my life, and in a very linear way, sort of put me on a path to engaging with the civil rights movement, particularly an organization called the Northern Student Movement that doesn't get the attention it deserves. And that led me into the anti-war movement, which I was with a group called People Against Racism that approached opposition to the war from a racial perspective as a racist war being particularly impactful on non-white people in the United States. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Wow.
How about you, Elizabeth? What got you started?
Yes. I, in college, worked a lot on a different issue, the issue of sexual violence. And in that context, we were hearing a lot of men on campus, a lot of male students on campus who were learning more about the prevalence of sexual violence on campus, and they were becoming motivated to act. They were saying, "This is horrible. I didn't know. I want to do something. What can I do?" And what they did was maybe come to a protest or maybe post on social media, and that was something. But as a woman in that context, what I really wanted to understand was, what do you say in the locker room to your teammate when he makes a misogynistic joke? Nothing, right? What do you do at your frat house with your fraternity brother at the party when he's getting too drunk or something? What do you do anything? No, right? And it was very clear to me that there was a role for men to play, right? This growing population of men on campus that were opting in, saying, I want to do something. We had something for them to do, right? It was, please respond, please intervene, because we need you to do that. That's not our work to do, that's your work to do. And it's really about the cultural shifting from within the community where the harm has been conditioned, right? So instead, that really required us to start with acknowledgement, right? Many men thought that the answer was, let me prove how I'm not the most violent man, right? This was at Stanford University. It was during the time of Brock Turner, which many probably still remember, a very violent example of sexual violence. And there was a lot of concern around, that's not me, that's not me. And we understood in this process, right, a very basic truth of change, which is that you must start with acknowledging its existence. And so what we had to do first was to support the few men who were willing, who were courageous enough to say out loud to their friends, to other men that trusted them, I have been conditioned as a man in a society that is misogynistic. And so I cannot avoid misogyny. And it was kind of like, and then it would lead into this real relief, because what it led to was, I can, however, choose to be very good at seeing it happen in real time. And then I can choose how I respond. And I can respond by interrupting it, by engaging with it, instead of by running away or denying or, getting lost. And that was very, very powerful. And it motivated other men to also have that courage, to also acknowledge it. And then once they could see it, they were starting to do something about it. But they needed support. They needed training. They needed to role play. They need to practice what to literally say in the moment, in the locker room, at the frat party, because there was no rehearsal space, right? We don't expect pro athletes to go on I'm going to make a sports reference, which is rare, but here we go. You don't expect the NBA player to go on the court at the championship game and win that game if he has never been to the gym or she has never been to practice. It's not a reasonable expectation. And yet we expect ourselves to be able to engage successfully where we have had no rehearsal. So this all was, it was really hitting me. I was super inspired. It was really effective. And my takeaway at that time was, well, I'm not a man, so too bad. I wish I could do this too. But however, it was 2014, 2015. So it was also a major time for the Black Lives Matter movement, of course, and Michael Brown's murder was also happening at that time. So I think that confluence finally, a few, months later, really hit me in the face. And I do also have a moment that I remember realizing that as someone racialized as white in the United States in this racialized hierarchy, it is exactly the same mandate. If you are from with the community where the harm is conditioned and continues to perpetuate, your role is to acknowledge and interrupt that within yourself and with the people in that community that you have relationships with intimately and institutionally every day. And so after that, it was a very clear, I know I had to find, my Franks and I had to go to the research, but it was very crystallized because I was on the other side basically of that situation in a different context.
One addition, if I could, very quick. It also, and we've discussed this, you get a moment, there is an aha moment in which you begin to grasp how bad white supremacy is for white people. And that also then changes your relationship to the work and gets you at least a baby step out of the itself white supremacist savior mentality that is not part of the solution, but part of the problem.
Well, I want you to hold on to that thought, Frank. Dick is going to ask a question, and then I want to come
Yes,
back with how bad it is for white people. Go ahead, honey.
Yeah, so I wanted to share a little about baby steps and origin stories too, just a little bit. So I grew up in the suburbs of Minneapolis, Scandinavians to the horizon, all white, except across the street was one black kid who was a year older than me, great basketball player, great student. He was my idol. I chased him around all the time. We rode our bike down to downtown Minneapolis because he couldn't go in a swimming pool in the suburbs, but I would go with him there. Second, my Methodist Youth Fellowship organization had us knocking on doors to raise funds for the freedom fighters in 62 or 63 or so forth. Wasn't really my idea. I was happy to participate. But what I got a view on racism because an occasional person would invite me in and give me cookies and a glass of milk. More likely, somebody would slam the door in the face, and a couple times they would chase me around the front yard. So
And how old were you?
well, 13 or 14
Yeah,
or so.
you're a kid.
Yeah, so, but I mean, and that helped give me an orientation that carried me through my life. But the question or the point of view I want to raise was currently, right now, especially the last few weeks, we're in the midst of a powerful counter-revolution against racial justice. White supremacy is being glorified. Racists are coming out of the closet and saying it loud and saying it proud. The whole fight against CRT and criminal race theory and every critical race theory and wokeism is all about we don't want any black people in our neighborhood. And a lot of people are joining into it. And I wonder if you have thoughts about what an individual, well, you've already talked about it stuff. So a person who's not yet into some of these movements, where would they start?
Okay, so why don't we let Elizabeth answer that since she started much more recently than Frank. And then Frank, you can talk to us about the impact of white supremacy on white people.
Okay.
Elizabeth.
Beautiful.
Yes, there are many ways, and maybe we can share a couple more organizations for folks to look into. I think there's also we might be able to create it, right? You might join something like a Showing Up for Racial Justice, which is great, and they're continuing to do a really important campaign of response to the current administration. There are also many Black-led organizations that you can follow, that you can contribute to the collective action, right? There's a lot of ways. And we don't need an organization, right? Like you can choose to say something in that meeting at work. You can choose to start going to your PTA meetings, and it does take some courage and some support. So my organization, Reckon With, is really trying to provide peer support for people who have that desire and need a little bit of structure and a little bit of ongoing personalized support. So we're reckonwith.org. But again, I think finding folks in your community that can be there with you, to encourage you to be your more brave self. And then, of course, to tap into the many wonderful efforts of organization and also of learning, right? That we are so lucky to have many. I think that's what I'd say.
So what we'll do is we're gonna in the body of this article, we're going to give some links. You mentioned one of the organizations, and we're familiar with that organization. We'll put a link there.
Great,
Right.
and we can share a couple more as well.
Okay, great.
So
Frank has.
here's a hope that maybe you can talk to. I mean, so it seems to me that the pressures aren't hard enough. The news is ugly enough, and enough of us who might have cared a little bit about racism are getting pushed in. And it seems like this might be a moment that we might have the kind of organization, maybe not as big as the anti-war, anti-Vietnam organization, maybe not as big as the civil rights movement, but maybe. And maybe that's what we need. We need people really to get off their duffs. As Elizabeth says, there's a dozen ways you can get involved. The only problem is getting out the door and joining them. So
Anybody can write a letter to the editor. Anybody can go to a PTA meeting. Anybody can go to their block club. Anybody who's in a union can go to their union meeting. But you go there with a different frame of reference. And I want to bring that back to Sharon's question. And we address this in a roundabout way in the piece. There's a phrase I use that Elizabeth's heard a million times. I call it the tyranny of the left-right paradigm. And the tyranny of the left-right paradigm, among other things, excludes race from the conversation. But it doesn't have to be excluded. It can be introduced in all the ways that we have been addressing. And it's liberating. Part of what's bad about white supremacy for white people is that it is spiritually and intellectually suffocating. It so confines and restricts your ability to imagine a better world, to imagine a term like beloved community or revolutionary love really means. It's all in James Baldwin, and it's all in Martin Luther King, and it's all in the writings of Vincent Harding, and it's all there. I'd sometimes say to people, there's nothing that prevents all the books on my bookshelf from being on your bookshelf either. And a lot of it does start with reading, or it's 2025, so you watch a video or whatever. But just get out of your ideological and intellectual prison and appreciate your capacity for curiosity, for learning, for conversation, for building community.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Frank. Yes, you're so right. The left and right, first of all, I kind of reject this whole notion of this left and right paradigm. I think our problem is the top and the bottom. And the reason that the bottom is so huge and disjointed is because of this racial divides and ethnic divides, because there should be no way on earth that a democracy could birth an Elon Musk. We should not have a billionaire, but we can't.
This is a huge failure.
It's a huge failure that's hurting all of us, regardless of our race.
Yep.
So I get on my soapbox.
But isn't that what we're here for?
Yeah.
But do you ever get off it?
Well, self-care requires rest and a lot of laughter. That's one thing we believe in, for sure.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
No, I was just I think this point, I so appreciate you raising it, Sharon, and speaking to it, Frank. And I think, one thing that's often talked about is, we really need to, engage poor white people to see how they are not benefiting from this system, which of course is important and true. And if, to your point just now, right, like no matter how much wealth you have accumulated, the degradation and distortion of our emotional and spiritual capacities creates so much harm. And I think just to, again, to share a tangible example, which took me many years to understand as an example of how white supremacy hurts me. But I have an autoimmune disease. It's called celiac disease. It's lifelong, incurable. It's manageable through diet, but it is not a curable condition. And it is triggered by emotional distress. And I had to realize that as a person conditioned in this society to turn away and disregard and disassociate at such frequency from the pain of other people, from the conditions of other people, how could I expect I would listen to myself when it pertained to myself? So I was in a situation that was very destructive, and my body tried to tell me to get out. I was sick physically every day for years. And because of my conditioning to ignore reality, ignore this physical representation of disease, I did not tend to that, to the point that it caused me to get this lifelong incurable disease. And it might sound, weird that's an example, but it does feel so clear to me now as I research and understand better the legacy of so many of generations of my family members who have witnessed and seen horrific violence against Black people, against non-white people, and turned away. That's not a natural response. And when you disassociate and train yourself to ignore to that degree the experience of others, it's going to also include you. And so I think that we in Reckon With, we really try to support white people to ask that question. It's not a question that we're asked, especially folks that have socioeconomic experiences of wealth, to really dig into what is communication like in your family? What is the emotional state of your interactions with conflict? Are you able to, there are so many ways that we actually can track this very tangibly that is necessary if we're going to approach this from a place of mutual liberation, which is so important.
Well, I don't think it sounds strange at all, Elizabeth. As a matter of fact, I wrote an article. I was watching the movie Roots, and there's a scene in Roots when Kunta Kinte is beaten almost to his death because he refuses to take on the name. I guess it's Toby. He says, "My name is Kunta Kinte," and the overseer just keeps whipping him and whipping him. And in the scene, you have white people that are standing there watching, and somehow it occurred to me, what does it take to stand and watch something like this?
Yes.
How much of yourself, how much of your humanity do you have to separate from in order to stand there and observe something that is so brutal and inhumane? And then I thought about the scenes of men being lynched and white people gathering and even bringing their children, and as if this is some form of entertainment.
Yeah.
And so it occurred to me that maybe that legacy of that has been enculturalized in whiteness and has been handed down, just as there have been some ugly stuff that has been handed down to all of us. All of us inherit some of the legacies of our ancestors, because you kind of wonder how is it that police officers can just keep doing what they're doing, killing unarmed black people, and the nation itself just, now it's sort of like it becomes these videos, or there are voyeurs that watch the videos as a form of entertainment of black men and women being killed.
Well, it's in the news today, actually, a piece about how Trump's growth parallels the growth of, what is it, the Worldwide Wrestling Federation or something. And I really want to focus in on the violence aspect of this, because I've come to the conclusion that even more than we're in denial about racism, we're in denial about violence, and how central it is because you can't have settler colonialism, and you can't have slavery, and you can't have Jim Crow, and you can't have patriarchy and misogyny without violence. And the internalization of the violence, and what we're touching on here, the violence, white people treat each other like shit. And that doesn't come from nowhere, and that's not disconnected from the violence required to enforce the gender and racial and economic hierarchies. It's all of a piece, and it all compels us as well to look at the violence. Just as we look at the microaggressions of white supremacy and the microaggressions of misogyny, the violence and the way in which we deal with each other, and as Elizabeth was saying, handle conflict within our own families, is a piece of this world that we are trying to get beyond. I like to think, in sloganish and slogans and so on. I had one today that seems to fit here, which is that the democracy we never had is dead. Time to start over.
Absolutely. Well, it's people like you and like us, just sharing these messages that I hope reach other people. We want people, if you're listening to this and you've never heard of the LA Progressive, share this, please. We're going to be putting in some links if you want to learn more about what you can do to support the anti-racism movement. We are going to encourage Frank and Elizabeth to please join us again. This is such an enjoyable conversation. At these difficult times, it's nice to talk to like-minded people. I love when people agree with me, and you guys.
we all do. But this media, alternative media, is more important now than it has ever been. And so we wish us all growth and success.
And I think one more piece on what we can do to this end of our conversation, the practices of embodiment and learning to identify activation in our nervous systems and then to settle ourselves is such a vital part of what we can do, right? Not just the kind of external action taking, and there's so many practitioners. Of course, Resmaa Menakem's work is very vital in that space. And so I do, especially with white-bodied people, as he names us, people racialized as white, it's so important that we engage in those practices so that we can hold and then metabolize, right? This is all of his language, but it's very important that we build those capacities so that we can start a different path.
So this has been thrilling. We can't wait till you come back with the next article and interview. It's so nice meeting you sort of face to face, as good as we do in 2025. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Hope to see you again soon. Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.